Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. This is elephant garlic. In fact, it's not technically a garlic. It is a leek with this swollen base, but very distinctly garlic flavoured and scented too. And I like them very much because although they're much bigger than the average garlic, they are much milder. And ideally, you harvest them as the leaves start to die back. These have flowered, and that's a sign that the plant is putting its energy into producing seed rather than the bulb. But you can delay it a little bit longer by just breaking the seed heads off. Well, look at that. I've never seen one like that before. It's almost certainly because I planted the clove upside down with the pointy side facing down into the soil, and it's worked its way up and round, but it'll taste just as good. Always use a fork when you're harvesting garlic of any kind. Don't just pull them out the ground, because there is a root plate where these roots attach to the bulb. And if that is broken or damaged, they don't store nearly so well. So you dry them with the roots on, and then when it's completely dry and all this has dried back, you cut it off, and then you can trim the roots. On today's programme, we join Adam in his garden with innovative ways to save water.
You only have to go out into your garden after you've had a good downpour to know how much your plants love rainwater. So, as much of it we can capture and save, the better, you know.
And we meet three sisters who, over the last few months, have had to learn quickly how to grow food for themselves, as well as their hungry tortoises.
It's so plus, it's so big, it's so amazing. It's growing. Ta-da! Ta-da!
And I shall be doing a very specific kind of rose pruning, as well as planting some gherkins. The Jewel Garden is in a process of transition. We've lost that full, bright colour of late spring, and we haven't quite hit the summer stride. So for the last week or so, I've been setting things in place to maximise the effect later on in summer. And to create the room for that, I'm going to cut back this oriental poppy. It's a lovely, big, dramatic flower with huge orange petals. But the last one has fallen, there are no more buds developing. And there are these lovely seed heads. And it'd be quite reasonable not to do this for another week or so to enjoy the way the seed heads look. But what I'm going to do is cut the seed heads, and the rest of the foliage needs to be cut right back hard. So be brave and just go for it. It stops these dying back and getting soggy and forming a kind of slimy carapace over the heart of the plant, and that can rot it. And by letting light and air in, you get new, healthy growth, and quite often it will reflower later in summer. Now, while I'm here, it's worth taking stock of this pot, which is part of this late summer arrangement. This is the ginger plant, which will produce these tall orange plumes of flower. And I've underplanted it with some French marigolds and an orange form of million bells, which is just starting to trail over the sides. But a big display like this quite quickly exhausts the goodness in compost. And what I have here is a liquid seaweed feed, which I do use a lot along with a homemade comfrey feed. But if you can't get either, if you just get a basic tomato feed, it will have the same effect, because all these feeds are very high in potash. And at this time of year, that's feeding flower production. And if you've got a plant that is really vigorous and doing well, but not producing either any or many flowers, it's probably because you're giving it too much nitrogen. That's a feed that you want to give earlier in the year, in spring, to encourage the plant to grow. Mix it up to the right strength and water it once a week. Now you can see that's a pretty dark chocolatey colour. Don't be tempted to overfeed because the plant can only take up so much feed in one go. And down below I've got fuchsias, which did actually flower in the greenhouse all winter, but I cut them back really hard in April as soon as the foliage started to grow because they need a rest period. And now it's budding up well and we can have a second really good display. And the beautiful thing about fuchsias is that they will go on flowering right up to the first frost. So these can flower almost into December. Just 2 tips with them. Don't put them into blazing sunshine and also protect them from wind. They don't like being battered by wind. And I water and feed once a week as a rule. We have Feeding Friday, so it's easy to remember. And every pot in the garden gets a good soak and a feed. Looking after your water and harnessing it is becoming a horticultural skill in its own right. And in his own garden, Adam is managing both his plants and his water supply for maximum effect.
Yes, it is me. I desperately need a haircut. Also, I went to put my boots on this morning and realised there's a hole in the bottom. And look, the weather has broken, so we've had some rain. Kids are already moaning, but myself and the plants are over the moon. If you remember, when I first moved in, this was the first area that I ever got stuck into. And I've been editing it, playing with it, but I've got something else that I want to do here today. But that is for later on. I've got plenty to get on before, so we best crack on. This year, when it comes to the rain, it's been a case of feast or famine. And that can be pretty challenging for us gardeners. And as tempting as it is to turn to the hose pipe, we should remember that we can use up to 1,000 litres in 1 hour. That's the equivalent of running about 13 baths. That's not just expensive, but a real waste. Instead, we all need to be making the most of our rain. I've got a few ideas as to how we capture that precious rain when it does arrive, but also how we help our plants through the dry periods. Making the most of the rainfall isn't just about saving what comes out the sky. It's also about making the most of the moisture we already have in the ground. So think about the predominant weather conditions in your region, as it varies hugely up and down the country. Are you wet and wild, or mostly dry and sunny? We live on the east of the country and in general it's very dry. So I tend to pick plants very much with that in mind. And then once you've got your head around your region, it's then the detail of your garden. And what I mean by that, even in the smallest space, you will get dry areas, damper areas, areas that really hold the heat, others that stay cool during the day. And once you start to understand that, it helps you manage your garden through the season. I brought you here just to show you, look, it really rained last night and this part of the garden's still very dry. That is caused by something called rain shadows. So even after we've had rain, the tree above is sheltering this space and the water's not getting in. Look at the lovage in behind me, it's really not happy. Means I'm going to put a bit of mulch on here and help it through the season. I don't normally mulch this time of year, but if you do see a plant suffering like this lovage, give the roots a thorough soaking and apply a thick mulch of well-rotted organic matter around the base. This will help conserve the moisture and give the plant the nutrients it needs. Just want to show you something else over here. The more you get used to your own plants, this might sound a bit mad, but I think they talk to you. I think they tell you, if they're getting themselves a little distressed. This Deschampsia is as dry as straw, and you don't have to look too far for the reason. It sits just under the canopy of this tree and it's not getting enough moisture. Interestingly, if you look down there, only about 1.5 meters away, and those are fine. But what's wonderful about your herbaceous perennials and your grasses, you can be quite harsh with them. So what I'm going to do with this, I'm just going to cut it back. And there is little signs of green growth in there. like giving it a good haircut, like I desperately need at the moment. I think I can tidy that up, give it a good mulching round, keep the moisture in there for the rest of the year, and it'll start to shoot again. Anyway, let's get on to some planting. I'm going to go slightly bigger than I would normally, and I mean wider, not necessarily deeper. I'm going to work just a little bit of organic matter into the soil. What I mean by that is I use manure or my own compost, leaf mould. It's really going to hold the moisture in around those roots. That will help them get themselves away. And for me, it's just about getting you through that first season. I soak the roots of the campanula until they are really sodden. Just loosen up those roots around. No work into the hole. Having that extra compost worked into the soil will help that plant retain moisture. Break the soil up so that there's good contact with the roots. You can see, it's nice to see some worms in there. It's a good sign, isn't it? When we do water this in, I'm going to try not to use the hose pipe too much. I think we can all be very quick to get the water out, and a lot of plants, they'll adjust, you know. If you just keep piling water on top all the time, what happens is the roots sit close to the surface and, you know, and they're thirsty constantly. If you just slowly reduce that water, the plant will harden to less water. Get that back over. I wouldn't normally put this much fuss into the planting, but I know this is just going to give it an extra bit of care. With climate change resulting in swings of temperature and rainfall, it's a good idea to keep that in your mind when you're choosing your plants. And there's something else we can do so we don't always resort to the hose. You only have to go out into your garden after you've had a good downpour to know how much your plants love rainwater. So, as much of it we can capture and save, the better, you know. So we've got our water butts that can sit on our garages and our sheds, but I like to do something a bit more interesting. I've got these little tanks all around the garden. If I notice something's suffering, I've got a watering can, it's straight in the tank, and I just pour that water straight in the root of those plants. And I know that rainwater is going to be so much better for that plant and help it a little bit more. This is probably my favourite. Sits at the back of the greenhouse, it's fed by the little downpipes there, and I've just planted them up with lilies, irises, and there's some bulrush in there. And I use it just as a little dipping tank. So I place my seed tray on top of the lilies there, leave that there for a couple of minutes, that soaks up the water. There you go. Done. So I thought it might be nice just to show you how to put one of these together. Another steel tank. Don't laugh, I do love a steel tank, but Mrs. Frost calls me steptoe, all right, because I have a tendency to pick these things up on my travels and say, do you know what, it'll come in handy one day, and they always do. You could do it in a washing up bowl, an old bucket. I've seen it done with wooden half barrels, all sorts of things. They're really easy to do. You could sink it into the ground or you can sit them above. So what I've already done is I've already put this in level. We've put a spirit level across the top and then filled it up with tap water. I mean, normally I'd use rainwater, but it's been so dry. But 4 days, the chlorine starts to dissipate, which will be fine for the plants. So I suppose the first thing to do that's important is get the height of the plants right. So what I'm going to do is just place some bricks to roughly what I think the height of the plants is going to be. This is a water spearmint, brilliant plant, white flower, going to grow just probably shy of a foot. At the back, I'm going to put this little rush in. One of its common names is flying hedgehogs. Look at the tops. They're really cool, don't they? And this is a lesser spearwort, which are lovely little buttercup flowers. And then our water lily. So that wants about 6 inches to the top, so that can sit right on the bottom. Then it's just a matter of starting putting the cobbles in. So this can take a little bit of time. I've already washed these cobbles off, which makes a lot of sense, otherwise you end up with a huge amount of dust in the bottom there. And what I am going to do is I'm going to start to build at the back there. The cobble's quite high. It just gives me some sort of beach or way out, so any wildlife ends up in there that's struggling can get out. So the next thing I want to do is just use the smaller cobbles, but I'm just going to bring that lily up a little bit. And if I just do that, look, I know by the morning that'll be sat quite happily. Once I've got all the big ones in, I just start to scatter around some of the smaller cobbles, and it fills the little voids with the bigger cobbles cores, but also holds the pots in place so they don't move. And then smaller gravel. So that is about it. Apart from, we're just going to drop in a little bit of oxygenating weed. Lovely sort of feathery foliage, not much in the way of roots, and it literally floats in the water. But what's wonderful about that is that's what helps keep the algae down. So you create this balance. You get that balance right, and it ends up clear as a bell. So why not have a go? Because I think, you know, not only do they look lovely, but it's what they bring into your garden. And for me, you know, that balance of us using our gardens and our wildlife is what makes it special.
Of course, the big difference between Adam's garden and this one is that drought and being too dry is the predominant issue, whereas here we tend to be too wet. Although the difference between the winter soaking we get, the sodden winters, and the much drier summers is becoming more and more marked with climate change. And handling that and managing it from individual plants to water conservation is something that we're all going to have to learn. Now, I suspect that after slugs and snails, the question asked most is the correct way to prune roses. And the truthful answer is there is no correct way. Roses are tough plants. Think of them as a bramble. You can hack them, you can bash them, you can slash them, and they'll just come back for more. But, no, there's a but always going to happen. Certain roses do need to be pruned at certain times. Now, what we have here are species roses that are adapted to growing in some shade and in relatively poor soil. So here, for example, we have Rosa dupontii. And you know if it's a species rose if it's only got a Latin name. If it's got any kind of English name, even though there's a Latin name as well, then it is not a true species. And a species rose is simply one that grows in the wild. They all invariably have simple flowers. This, you can see with dupontii, it's got pretty little, very, very pale pink flowers with a yellow center, perfect for pollinators. And those flowers are flowering on last year's growth, which means that if I prune these in spring, there will be no flowers on them. So it's important that I do my pruning immediately after the flowering is finished, which in this case is about now or in a few weeks' time. And when you prune them, go right down to the base. And that will let light and air into the center of the shrub, and that will stimulate new growth, which will start in a week or two, grow for the rest of this summer, and may well bear flowers next year. And as well as having what I think are really charming, beautiful flowers, many of them go on to develop into dramatic rose hips. And the hips are truly decorative in autumn. So you don't want to cut off where the flowers have been unless you mind going without the hips. But species roses are meant to look wild, so don't try and constrain and train them. Now, we had a film from a viewer just outside Peterborough showing an ingenious way of planting up house leeks.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Burrows, and I'm actually aged 93. And if somebody asked me what was my favourite thing, I would have to say gardening. I used to pick these old bricks up off the shore, but we used to pick up round-edged ones that had been rolled over by the waves like this. Very beautiful, I must say. I have a handful of pebbly soil that I am, get out, going to plant. I'll take this little chap because he's off to the side. I'm not injuring you, are I? Little roots all coming up. Oh, look, a very good root. Aren't they lovely? Dear little babies. Look at you. Yum, yum, they say. Drinkies for us. If anyone asked me if I would like to live my life again, there are a lot of things I would like to change. But the one thing I would not change is the way I live at the moment, which is I'm so happy. I live with people I love dearly and very nice dogs, which is very important. And I do a lot of gardening, and nobody tells me off. I get away with murder.
I love Elizabeth's bricks. That's such a good idea. And I was thinking, well, I am surrounded by people I love and I garden most of the day. The only big difference being is I do get told what to do and told off all the time, but there you go. Maybe when I reach her age, I can do whatever I like. Now, I'm going to grow a gherkin. In fact, I hope I have lots and lots of gherkins, but I only need one plant. Gherkins are essentially a small cucumber. They've got warty skins, and of course they pickle really well, and I love pickled gherkins. I've mixed up a fairly rich potting mix of peat-free compost with some sieved garden compost and a bit of grit in it to add drainage. But I'm going to make it even richer. I'm going to grow them in a pot. I've had this for about 20 years. And I've been reusing it all the time, and I think it's good for another 20 years. And as I've said countless times now, the best way to cut down on your plastic use is to use your plastic. It's got drainage holes that I've drilled into the bottom and also drainage holes in the side. But I'm not going to put the compost straight in because I'm going to put a layer of neat garden compost at the bottom. And that will have two functions. Obviously, it will enrich the roots when they reach it, but also, more pertinently for the gherkins, it will act as a sponge. It'll hold moisture because gherkins, like cucumbers, like lots and lots of water. And then fill up with this, and I won't try and mix it in. You can grow gherkins outside. I've grown cucumbers outside and they fared perfectly well. But they do love heat. And if you've got a greenhouse, then it's a good way of using it. Now, a big pot like this will take one plant. This is a variety called Partner. And you can see that there's a little flower with a small gherkin already forming. But the plant is looking a little bit anemic because it's run out of goodness from this small pot. High time that it was planted up. Simply push that in there like that. But this will grow 6 foot tall or even more. These are vigorous plants. So I will support it. But if you put in canes like that, of this sort of dimension, tie them at the top, train the gherkin up, and it'll have tendrils that will attach to it with these little fruits hanging down. Pick them regularly. There's a swallow, as I'm talking to you, there's a swallow trying to come in because there's a swallow's nest in the tool shed. And the poor parent keeps coming to the door and hovering, and it wants to come in, but it can see me and it doesn't know what to do. Right. I'm going to put this pot into the greenhouse, And don't forget to keep them well watered. The more water, the better, really. And I expect to be harvesting the first of the little fruits in about 2 to 3 weeks' time. But these are tender plants, so the first frost will kill them. Now, the first frost here at Longmeadow can happen any time in October and go on happening well into May. But down in Bognor Regis, in the garden of Christine Mitchell, you have a much milder climate. We visited her garden last year, but it's worth having another look because although it's small, it has a very different range of conditions out of which she has created something beautiful from scratch.
This is my garden. I live in West Sussex, not far from the sea. I have 2 different environments here to work with. The lower section is in the shade, and therefore it's planted with hostas and ferns and shade-loving plants. The upper section, we get the sun all day. Because it's a small space, I've utilised more pots than I would normally do, but it's a way of bringing colour into the garden. The section I love most about my garden is just by my lounge door. I have the Gertrude Jekyll rose there, I have the Christmas box, lily of the valley, and the scent from spring to summer is lovely. I have my morning coffee there, and the sun just peeps through. It makes me feel very calm. There's many ways of creating extra space in the garden. I just had a blank fence, but I then decided to make a border. I've got some old decking boards that I painted white, so that gave me a height. And therefore, I could then build the soil level up enough so that I could plant climbers all along the fence. Opposite one of the windows was just a brick wall, and so my son built a living wall from pallets, which is half in the shade, and then in the afternoon it gets the sun. I like upcycling, making use of items that people have thrown out. I think they've added character to my space. When I first got here, there was a boat in the corner, all overgrown, and so I decided that would make a lovely seating area. I painted it turquoise, put some turquoise cushions in it, and it makes a lovely feature. Unusual. I get a lot of pleasure from nurturing my plants. If I go to a garden centre, it's the reduced section, and I've got 2 cannas, which I picked up for 50p last year, and now they're 6 foot tall. As things have progressed, it seems to have got more exotic, and my grandson now calls it the jungle. This garden is special to me. I put a lot of love and work into it. I feel I've achieved so much over the past 6 years, considering it's such a small space. But I can sit here now and think, I've done it.
I do know exactly what Christine means. There's sometimes I walk around this garden and I think, God, we made this. But actually, as soon as I think it's gone, because a garden never finishes. It's changing and evolving all the time, and not always as you had planned or wanted it to. And not just on a big scale, but also from day to day and season to season. So here in the writing garden, for example, about 3 weeks ago, it was almost perfect. You had the froth of the cow parsley, you had that lovely Allium Everest. There was just a general white, frothy flow running through it, which was exactly as I'd planned the garden. But of course, that's over. And so I've cut it back hard, and now the challenge is to recreate that feeling with a whole different set of plants. Now, I'm starting with annuals that I've grown from seed. And this is Nicotiana sylvestris. It's one of my favorites. I've always grown it, and those of you who have grown it too will know that it is a majestic plant. You can buy bedding tobacco plants, and they tend to come in a range of colours with sort of pale pinks, yellows, but they tend not to grow much more than about 2 or 3 foot tall. Nicotiana sylvestris is a different kettle of fish altogether. This will go 5 or 6 feet tall and has the most fantastic white tubular flowers that hang down on top of the large stem, and the foliage is big and actually very sticky too, and the foliage is fragrant as well as the flowers. And during the daytime, they soak up the sun, the oils heat up, and then as the weather cools in the evening, they give off this very musty, rich tobacco scent. And that is designed to attract nighttime pollinators, obviously dominated by moths. So walking through this garden at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, you just enter a whole sea of rich scent. Because these become quite large plants, you don't want to plant them too close together. So I would say a couple of feet between each. And they do very well threaded through a border. They like full sunshine, but I've often grown them in partial shade. You know, as long as they get sun for half the day, they will perform. I will thread these through the whole of the writing garden. But it's time to look at one of your gardens, and I always like to see gardens from all over the world. And this time we have one from Holland. But it doesn't matter where the garden is, we all share the same problems.
Hello and welcome to the world of my garden. My name is Tineke and I'm in my apartment in the city center of Amsterdam where I live. But I'm so lucky as to have an allotment garden on the outskirts of the city. Last year I tried dahlias there. I like dahlias very much, but the snails liked them too and ate them all. So this year I've tried it differently and planted the tubers in pots on the gallery of my apartment, where they are safe from snails. As you can see, they've grown quite a bit and they are ready to be planted out in the garden. So let's go! Here we are. This is my garden. Because I don't want to lose my dahlias again this year, I've decided to build an obstacle course. I've put the pots on the gravel. Now that won't be too much of an obstacle for them. But then they will have to cross 2 lines of copper tape and hang upside down to work their way up this fiber mat, which, as I imagine, is not a nice feeling to their slimy bodies. If there is a super snail, however, who can overcome this, it will find fluffy dried moss at the stem of the dahlia. If it will climb in, it will tumble down due to its weight and hopefully give in. I hope my plants won't be smothered by all these obstacles. I will pinch them out later as you suggested, and with any luck I can show you beautiful flowering dahlias this autumn. Bye bye!
Come on, there's a good girl. Thanks very much, Tineke, and I look forward to seeing pictures of them when they're at their very best. Now, I'm going to store my garlic in here in the greenhouse. If the weather was consistently dry, as we had in the spring, then I would leave them outside. In fact, I very often have dried garlic, just leaving them on the soil. And in a hot 10 days, they will completely dry. Or you can make a little rack that lifts them up off the soil, so if it does rain, they dry out quickly. So I just place them down individually, not one on top of each other, but just give them room like that. And what matters as much as anything is the foliage drying as the bulb. The whole greenhouse is starting to smell garlicky. And then this lovely one here, it is going to make me laugh for a long time. It's great. Always harvesting and drying garlic is a real measure of midsummer, that the year is half the way through. And we're about half the way through the programme, and still to come. There's another chance to join Frances on a visit she made to meet two brothers who designed gardens to attract as much wildlife as possible.
From a very early age, we were gardeners of a different sort. It was a total immersion in the natural world.
And I will be picking some lemons from my own lemon tree. But first, we have a film from sisters who have found that over the last few months, their relative lack of knowledge about gardening has become an all-consuming passion. And not just for them either, but also to satisfy the very particular requirements of their pets.
My name is Kirsty.
My name is Rebecca. And my name is Mandy, and we live in Poole in Dorset. Since the lockdown, we have taken to a bit of gardening.
I love gardening. It's my favourite kind of thing, my hobby. Lovely, love flowers.
And now, it's going money.
On your bike. Gardening is new for us. Kirsty and Rebecca are usually out at pottery, craft classes, or practicing their beloved Elvis and Michael Jackson impersonations. But in March, we were suddenly at home with time on our hands and worried about how to get our pet tortoises enough fresh lettuce. We decided to begin with just to paint up some old terracotta pots. We put them in the garden, and we also posted them online just to show people what we were doing. We were overwhelmed by the response, so we cleaned out the greenhouse, and we found some old seeds and some old compost and planted some stuff up.
Wavy, wavy.
Becky has been an able assistant in between practicing her dance routines. Is that moonwalk?
Yeah.
But Kirsty has definitely been bitten by the gardening bug.
It's so plus, it's so big, it's so amazing. It's growing. Tomato plants and basil and chilies. It grows so quick.
We've now got trays of fresh lettuce, so the tortoises help themselves to some while the others regrow. And we discovered it wasn't just our tortoises who liked our gardening. Everybody started to really enjoy our little videos. So we realised that not only were they cheering us up, but we were cheering up all those other people that were also logged in and following us on social media. And having watched Monty plant out his runner beans, we knew exactly what to do with ours. What are you doing?
And the planting runner beans for Guns Wheels.
Perfect.
Okay. This is runner beans. They're gonna grow in that soil. Then dig a hole first. Well, hold in one of bean. Cover it in soil, keep it warm. And like that. And so thank you, it goes field.
We've been planting everything out since the lettuces and beans, with Kirsty's watchful eye. The sunflowers have needed staking, and hot sunshine has meant lots of watering for thirsty plants. That's brilliant.
Thanks.
But thanks to Monty, Kirsty knows not everything needs a daily soaking.
I can't water it
How do you know that?
because my John told me I can't water it and I just let it dry. I got more chilies, dangling bits.
We've had such a lovely time together, growing so many plants. Ta-da!
Ta-da!
And we've learned so much along the way. Asta.
Asta like a shop.
Not Asda, Asta. There's been so much support from our community. It's been amazing. But as animal lovers,
They got seeds.
Seeds.
Fish seeds.
we are still missing some friends on a Friday night. So finally, we just wanted to say to Nigel in the sky, say hello to all our dogs that have flown up there on high. We will miss you on the TV. The world will miss you too. And Monty, you're a diamond, and we send all our love to you.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers to Nigel.
Cheers to Nigel.
Nigel.
Cheers.
Cheers.
And why do you love gardening?
I love it.
You just love it.
Yeah.
Because it makes you smile, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you for your lovely poem, Kirsty and Rebecca. I thought your garden looked terrific, and I was very moved by your reference to Nigel, who, of course, I'm still missing like mad. But I have got topiary Nigel, and we need to look after him. He's getting a bit shaggy, as he was in life. And you can see that also, on the back here, Nigel's got some brown bits, and that's where the frost hit it in the middle of May. The sun came up, it was really hot, and burnt the frosted parts. But where the sun didn't hit, lower down, he's fine. He's still looking good. But if you've got brown bits on your yew hedge or on topiary, don't worry. It's not dying. It's just likely to be an effect of frost. But I think he's due for a little trim now, just to get him into shape. And you can trim topiary now and keep it looking crisp, but you'll probably have to do it again in September. But for a small bit of topiary, that's not much of a price to pay. Whereas if you wait till August and then cut topiary or yew hedges, then it should stay really crisp right through to the next May. But just clip away and let's make you look really smart, Nige. I have to say I'm getting so much pleasure from all the films that you're sending in. And we've had one from one of our youngest viewers, Ben, who is already a keen and ambitious gardener.
So, this is just an experiment, guys. We're going to show you how our oranges are going on. Whoa, this one sprouted.
Careful with it, careful with it.
One sprouted some root. Now we're going to check on our lemons.
Whoa!
Whoa.
Really, really delicate roots, but they are massive.
Yes, these are more impressive than the oranges for babies.
That's brilliant. Right, what we got here then? We're planting these lemons and oranges.
We're going to fill it with compost almost to the top. If you're following all my instructions at home and you're actually doing what I'm doing and planting all the things that I'm planting, I say carry on, let your dreams come true. Up to that mark there, 1 centimetre,
Okay.
and then your seed will be happening there. They want to go at the bottom.
Okay.
Then we want to squish that in. So now we're watering our plants. I want to tell you about a TV show. It's called Gardener's World.
Is this a rival TV show to yours?
It's really good, and someone else does loads of gardening.
And how does it compare to your gardening programme? More expert or less expert? Or
I think we're both the same.
Right.
Ben, I like your television programme. And maybe if you keep growing those pips, you will have trees as big as these ones here and you'll be able to pick fruit off them, but you might have to wait a bit. They've grown well this winter. We didn't put the big lemons indoors at all. We just put them under cover here in the Paradise Garden because they were too heavy and big to put in the greenhouse, and they've come through winter absolutely fine. But the thing about lemons is that they are relatively easy to grow. Of all the citrus, they are definitely the hardiest and the strongest growing. If you've never tried growing any kind of citrus before, start on a lemon. And it is necessary to harvest the lemons in order to keep the plants healthy. Now, Patty, you're probably going to have to get out of there if I'm going to put the lemons in. So don't go back to sleep. Come on, you jump out. How'd you go? There's a good... Whoops, there you go. There's a good girl. Off you go. It's quite tricky knowing when a lemon is ready to harvest. Now, obviously, when the fruit is completely ripe, it falls to the ground, but that's gone too far. And the Italians always say you should never pluck a lemon, you should always cut it because it can damage the plant. So if I take this one here and I just cut that like that, fruit makes huge demands on the parent tree. And if it's young and growing, then you want to limit the amount of ripe fruit on it, even though they look lovely. On a bigger tree like this, which looks fabulous, bedecked with all its jewel-like lemon fruit, well, we can leave quite a lot of them, but not too many. But a smaller one, it is important to harvest them as soon as they're ripe. So this one here, for example, it looks ripe, it feels nice, so I'm just going to snip that off like that. Yeah, it's got a good fragrance, and what's left behind is one there that is clearly not ripe. It's still pale and quite green, and actually, in here, that's this year's flowers, which are already producing tiny little fruits, and they will slowly develop. The more sun, the better, and they will be ready for harvesting in this garden, maybe late autumn or even next spring. Lemons can produce fruit all the year round, but it's a good idea to let them be dormant in winter, and they like to be in fairly moist, humid air. A lot of people bring their lemons indoors in October or November, and they look fabulous until about Christmas time, covered in fruit and smelling wonderful. And then the inevitable happens, the leaves turn yellow and they even drop off, and it looks as though the plant is dying. In fact, it's too dry. So try not to keep lemons in a centrally heated house if you possibly can over winter. A porch is ideal, or a cold greenhouse if you've got it. Now, last year, Francis went to visit a garden designed by the brothers Jim and Joel Ashton. And it's not just beautiful as a garden, it's also superb for wildlife.
We all know that planting native wildflowers, trees and shrubs is the best way to guarantee an abundance of wildlife in our gardens. But the good news is, if formal design is more your thing, you don't necessarily have to compromise. This garden is just over half an acre and it's in the centre of Bishop Stortford in Hertfordshire. Stansted Airport is just over there, and yet this whole garden is a stunning haven for wildlife. So how did all this begin?
It was from really a feral childhood, wasn't it?
It was very feral.
Kicked out the door in the morning and then brought back in at dinner time. But we had a wildlife pond in the garden, and we kind of spent most of our Saturday and Sundays sort of looking into that and seeing what we could find and teasing newts out of the weed with a maggot on a piece of fishing, our dad's fishing line. And,
oh, wow.
You know, so it was really, really great, and it kind of went from there, didn't it?
Yeah, it was a total immersion in the natural world. Our mother's side, they were all keen gardeners. That was naturally going to rub off, but it was always, she'd say, why are you messing about with nettles and thistles? You know, so from a very early age, we were gardeners of a different sort, you know, and thinking, how do we encourage wildlife through our gardening? So that it started in a really nice way, you know, and then progressed into something, you know, that we do now, which is quite lovely.
This garden is one of the first the brothers built back in 2014. Homeowners Nigel and Jill Kirby wanted to create a host of different wildlife habitats, along with more formal and herbaceous areas. They were made possible and overlap, thanks to some very clever design.
It's about thinking outside the box and thinking, not just to use the flat spaces, but the vertical spaces as well. So, for example, behind us, we've got this lovely oak trellis screening, which doubles up not only as a focal point with that log wall in the middle, that in turn is a little habitat for creepy crawlies, but as well the double lattice screening that we've put either side of it. Once those climbers, such as the clematis or the honeysuckle, have grown up through it to create a nice dense screen, blackbirds, robins and that sort of thing will nest in it as well, so it's a double whammy.
And sort of dual purposing things, so like this fence doubles up as an insect house on the
Absolutely.
other side.
Yeah.
So you're sort of not necessarily noticing it too much, but it is there and it's doing a job.
Absolutely.
Wildlife can love even the most formal features. This urn is a great focal point, but birds bathe underneath in the drips and on the top. And in the borders, the brothers combine lots of wildflowers, like this lady's bedstraw, alongside more traditional plants.
It really will create a fantastic variety of colours and a long flowering period, of course, which is the key thing.
And the things that are popular. Nowadays people love having digitalis and nigella in amongst their flower borders as well, so it's really come into fashion to use those plants too. So it's not a compromise on the aesthetic, but it does a job as well. Amazing. Just look at that lavender, it's teeming with bees.
Hundreds of bees, yeah.
And how do you feel straight lines versus kind of curvy lines? Is there a preference in terms of wildlife? Is there a better way?
It's purely on aesthetics, at the end of the day. If you've got a border that's 3 foot deep on a south-facing wall, the bees and the butterflies are going to love it just the same as if it's got some, kind of ebbs and flows. Wildlife doesn't care whether it's a straight line or curve.
There we go, see the myth. You don't have to have a natural-looking garden to have a wildlife-friendly garden.
Absolutely not, no.
Unsurprisingly, the brothers are very keen on attracting butterflies and moths to their gardens. There's even a moth border here, filled with nectar-rich, strong-smelling plants in white and cream to help night-flying moths to find a good meal. But that's not all. Good food plants will bring butterflies and moths into your garden. But to keep the population growing, it's so important that you also provide them with places where they can lay their eggs. Some caterpillars have evolved to feed on specific plants, and others are less fussy, so the edges of the meadow are full of caterpillar favourites.
So growing in the woodland border here, amidst the wildflowers for the nectar, we've got these shrubs, alder buckthorn and this buckthorn, and these are to attract the brimstone butterfly. And if you look closely, you can see there's just a larvae there, one of the caterpillars.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And that's going to turn into a butterfly quite soon. It's nearly ready to pupate. So again, you can see that they're pulling in. There's another one down here. It's pulling the butterflies in. That's going to keep them here and breed, so that's quite exciting.
Incredible. So different species will bring in different species of butterfly.
Yeah, exactly.
Lots of caterpillar favourites are likely in our gardens already. Holly and ivy, for example, are used by the holly blue butterflies, and they also give homes to nesting birds. Even just longish grass brings in this meadow brown butterfly. Do you have favourite species of caterpillar or moth or butterfly?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's hard to come here and choose one because there's so many usually. Also in Mullein, we grow verbascums, which many people are familiar with.
Yeah.
And we've got some great mullein on the chalk bank over there that seeds around every year. And there's some lovely mullein larvae on that at the moment, some big caterpillars. So
will they be moths or butterflies?
They're moths, so that's, again, another species, that's always here every year, and that numbers are increasing because we're planting those. So it's really conservation in action.
And how does that make you feel, having impacted so positively on the environment and created a beautiful garden at the same time?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
I don't blame you.
It's really nice, yeah.
I am blown away by the diversity of wildlife in this garden. I've even seen lizards amidst the huge array of insects, all right in the middle of Bishop Stortford.
It is amazing the richness and diversity of wildlife that almost any garden can contain. And your garden can become a wildlife reserve wherever it is and however small it is. Just sitting here in this little patch of the herb garden with the daisies and the sage and the fennel, and it is positively humming and buzzing with insects. I can hear many different types of birds, and probably there are little shrews and voles running around in the undergrowth. But there is one secret to really noticing them, and that is to give yourself the time to stop and look. But as well as giving yourself time to stop and really look and notice what's going on in your garden, there are still jobs to be done. To prevent plants from burning up in the heat, it's important to keep your greenhouse cool when the weather turns hot. So before you do anything else in the morning, remember to open all the doors and windows possible to allow cool air to flow through. To keep grass paths looking neat and also to stop the grass invading into a border, you do need to regularly trim them. A pair of long-handled shears is invaluable for this job, but you can do them with hand shears just as well. If you sow Florence fennel directly into the soil now, you can be harvesting them in September and October, but this is a job that you want to do this weekend. Sow them in rows, spreading the seed as thinly as possible. Cover them over and water them. And then as the seedlings appear, they can be thinned to about 9-inch spacing. The last couple of years, the Alchemilla has filled this path down the long walk. Now, it means that we can't use the path at all, but I think it looks fantastic. What happens is it's growing strongly, and then the rain comes and slightly flattens it, and it intermingles, and the whole thing becomes just this flowing Alchemilla avenue. I think it's an absolute joy. And then, when the flowers start to brown and fade, it can be cut back hard right to the ground, just like I did the Oriental poppy, and the Alchemilla will regrow and may well reflower before autumn. It's one of those plants that hardly ever will let you down. It grows very well in dry shade, and it just looks perfect in this entirely green setting. I love it. But that, I'm afraid, is all we have time for today. I'll be back next Friday at 8 o'clock. So until then, bye-bye.